This is a different angle than we're normally used to, but you get a view of this strange citrus tree that I'm always around, the Bounty that is Southern California. We have a full moon tomorrow on December the 11th at 9:12 p.m. So a lot of places it'll be on December the 12th, and it's being billed as the 12/12 full moon at 12:12 a.m. Eastern Time, and all of that is true. Full moons happen every 28 days, and as full moons go, this is a relatively benign full moon, but insofar as full moons are benign, but we do have them every 28 days, and as I've said before, it's not as if our world is rocked every 28 days. There are three things I want to cover with this full moon, and the first, of course, is stuff that you guys have heard before but bears repeating. What happens around a full moon? Things come to a head emotionally. Things that have been brewing for a while might come to some sort of completion. Things might be illuminated. Things might be pushed into the limelight. There could be resignations. There could be endings. There could be beginnings. There could be contracts coming to a culmination, decisions being made. There could be emotional, more than anything else, if you've noticed over the past week or so, as we've headed to this full moon, sometimes it just is an unpredictability with regard to what is on your plate and just getting busier. The pace, the intensity of our emotional and impulses and our material life just increases. So we're not really on top of our schedule. So we're not really in control. And it is, full moons have this out of control quality of the moon, which started about 2 weeks ago. It was reborn in contact with the sun, and things just accelerate, and it starts to feel as you head towards a full moon like the snowball is just, accelerating and gaining momentum. Sometimes and often this has an emotional component, it could have an intuitive component, or it could have a material component with things coming to a head, or there being some sort of a blow up or a showdown or an emotional meltdown. And the important thing, I think, with a full moon, as I've mentioned, is always to try and get present to what is being revealed. The limelight is an interesting component because, recently I've had a couple of readings where what has come to my mind as a question for me to ponder is, how much do I really believe in astrology? And how much do I really believe that it's important that we create what we create? And how much is not in our control? And the answer I'm realizing is that it's both. I lean more towards us creating what needs to be created, but you can't. I'll give you an example. This is the second thing I wanted to illustrate when it comes to full moons. It's award season in Los Angeles, and I've noticed this, and this year this is extremely present. The Golden Globe nominations were announced yesterday. The SAG announcements are tomorrow, the Screen Actors Guild nominations. The Oscars are on February the bottom line is there's an interesting correlation between full moons and when these nominations are announced, and therefore when things come to a head and when people hit the limelight. You could hit the limelight in a happy way because you're reaching a happy outcome, or you can hit the limelight and there can be some visibility on things in a less happy way. People don't get nominated. There are issues that are highlighted. But things come to a head, things happen, things are announced, things are revealed. There could be meltdowns, there could be positive culminations. I don't think that in these organizations there's anyone that's sitting down and thinking that all of this is going to happen around full moons. But the funny thing is, it happens around full moons. This is true of elections and election results. In 2016, when the election results were going to be announced, I had noticed that a certain presidential candidate who became president had a full moon in his house of career when the elections were being announced. In 2020, again, around the time of the presidential elections, the results are, I think, 2 or 3 days after a full moon. I don't think anyone is sitting down and making calendar or scheduling decisions around full moons. So the question is, who's really in control? And how do things occur? It's a separate video that I'm going to get to when it comes to who is in control in terms of what it is that I've been thinking about the work that I do. And do I believe in it and do I not? And I've always encouraged a healthy skepticism, and I continue to be in that space, and that is the lens through which I view this. But then as I was thinking about this full moon video, given what has been going on, I was just like, well, here we go. The full moon, this is the third and final and most important, and well, maybe there's four things I want to mention. So this is the third thing. The full moon occurs in the sign of Gemini. Gemini is a sign where we use our abilities related to communication and cognition, speaking, talking, our community, our friends, our networks. It could be mentors, it could be colleagues. Gemini is ruled by Mercury. We use our mind and our communication and our writing and our social media and our talking and our emails and our communicating. Traditionally, Gemini would rule siblings and cousins and relatives and neighbors and neighborhoods, vehicles, moving from one place to another, normal commutes, not long distance travel. What I like to call mundane communications, except Gemini is not mundane. Gemini is strategic and clever, and for people who are watching this who understand Hindi, the word that comes to mind is chalu. It's strategic. It has the gift of the gab, has the ability to use communication to maneuver through human interactions in such a way that an outcome can be positive. The word that comes to mind when Gemini energies are used well is savvy. With Gemini, we are learning to and processing, we're starting to use our minds to manage situations around us. Filling out applications, going to interviews, sales meetings, talking to colleagues, influencing people, doing YouTube videos. So some element, when I was thinking about the title for this video, for some reason what came to me was see and be seen. And certainly when we look at, for example, nominations or other things that were coming to my mind, I wasn't completely convinced and I wasn't completely crazy about it, but increasingly I feel like if there's something that's coming through with that clarity, that's what I'm going to go with. And see and be seen seems to be a theme. I don't know if it's a theme for everyone. I'd love to know if it resonates or not. You're welcome to leave a comment, let me know. But there is this quality, what are you seeing? That's always the case with a full moon to some extent. Is someone around you having a meltdown? Is there something emotional coming up? I'm not asking you to share very personal things in the comments field, but there's always some element of that. Is there something that you have insight into? Does it have a Geminian component? Does it have to do with relatives? Does it have to do with siblings? Does it have to do with cousins? Does it have to do with neighbors? Could it to some extent have to do with property? Sometimes it does. Does it have to do with interactions, sales, friends, gossip? Hearing things, lunchroom conversations, break room conversations, but even more than that, using those conversations, applications, and thinking about how do I ace this? How do I put this golf ball in the hole? How do I get it, especially using verbal and written communications? For those who are quick and who are social butterflies, so to speak. It's the social butterfly sign. It's the Mr. or Miss Popular sign. It's the smooth sign. It's the what is coming at me and how can I manage this? How do I project certain images? How can I be an influencer? How do I write this? It's that's what I mean by it's skill acquisition and the publishing or the teaching TED Talks. It's all managing, communication, commuting, transactions. It's that kind of full moon. I'll give you an example from my birthday was on December the 7th, on Saturday. And this was a wonderful birthday. There were lots of messages. So, my Facebook page, I don't allow for posts or to get tagged without reviewing them. Often because there are people who come to my Facebook page to look at some of these videos, and so I don't want the page to become too crowded. And also sometimes when you're tagged, you don't want to be tagged on certain things or something along those lines. So you want to manage that content to some extent, especially with the way social media is going. Irrespective. It's wonderful to get all the messages and all that kind of stuff. And typically, I would have time to respond to them as they were coming along. Typically, we'd post responses within 24 hours or 48 hours. This year, I just haven't had the time. And to my amusement, by the time I get around to replying and responding and posting and getting back to people, it will be the full moon in Gemini. I will be responding to friends. I will be on social media. I will be on email. I will finally be in communication. It also happens that Gemini occupies my house or my sector of friendship and community. So look at where in your chart Gemini sits. That's where the full moon is occurring. So I am now somehow going to be more visible in that sector of the chart. Not because I'm being rich and famous, but because I'm showing up. My plan is to be responding and be in communication with my community through social media to a large extent, maybe through email, to acknowledge and thank people for the messages that they have sent me. Are these going to be deep, massively deep interactions? No. Some of them may lead to other communications. It will be on a mundane level. And certainly, these are not strategic communications, but some of you may be involved in strategic maneuverings around you. As I said, it's a relatively benign full moon, but the full moon occurs within a new moon cycle, and you're welcome to refer back to the new moon in Sagittarius cycle, and that cycle had a kind of chess-playing component. So some of you may find yourselves in situations where there's a kind of a click, 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 and how do I smoothly say this, and how do I do this, and how do I manage this through communication? What's your intentions? With Gemini, and I've started to talk more about the positive, we all need to have the ability to be able to manage through certain situations and know what is going to play well and what is not going to play well. And sometimes it does not, sometimes you have to be savvy. If you're going to have a meeting and it's a professional meeting, and being authentic means spilling the beans on something personally, and that is not the idea of the right place at the right time. And what are you saying, and who are you saying it to? And what is the intention? What is the intended result? But with Gemini, sometimes it can go over and things can become manipulative and calculated and false and fake. And there are people who are slick. There's a slickness to the sign. Sometimes the slickness can be used to one's advantage. Sometimes it is not. In its higher vibrations, the sign of Gemini is extraordinarily communicative. I'm astonished by how many people I know who have strong Gemini placements who are in academia, who write, who speak, who talk, who might find themselves in places where they're processing information. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's also a need often with the sign of Gemini to know and understand how to play politics. And sometimes it's necessary, and it's a good thing. We're looking at academia, my department, my university, who has power? How does this work? If I need to get from point A to point B, how do I make it work? Those are, I think, effective uses of the sign of Gemini. And again, look at where Gemini sits in your chart. If it sits in the real estate section, or if it sits in the career section, or if it sits in the shared resources in the income section, it will show up in a different way. But it may have a see and be seen quality. In my case, the see and be seen is just that I'm going to be more visible by virtue of saying thank you to a bunch of people. Thank you for the birthday greetings. Thank you for, or start to be a little bit more in touch with them at this time. Here's the meaty part of what I wanted to share and talk about. The sign of Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is in the sign of Sagittarius. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is in Capricorn, and Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is in Capricorn. Currently, Saturn is the strongest planet in the zodiac by virtue of the fact that it is the planet with the most influence, influencing the vast majority of the planets, and it is strong and secure in its own sign. When I talked about Jupiter moving into Sagittarius, and it's a video, I'll make sure that the link to it is at the end of this once I'm done processing it, I talked about the fact that it's time to get serious, and we're all feeling this, and time to make things happen concretely and achieve things and move towards our goals. That may get temporarily waylaid by more social considerations, but it's still somewhere happening in the background. Mercury in Sagittarius is not the happiest of placements. Sagittarius is a sign that ultimately leans towards authenticity. And when it comes to managing things around us and managing our communications and dealing with the people we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And traditionally, it would include siblings and relatives and cousins. So that's why it sits in this part of the chart, because for communities and societies that are less nuclear and less isolated than, say, the United States, who you're surrounded by, if you think traditionally and way back to who would you be surrounded by? You'd be surrounded by your neighbors, and you'd be surrounded by your siblings and your cousins and your relatives, and you would need to manage and maneuver your relationships with them on a day-to-day basis to get what you want and to figure out how you would do certain things. Then the sign of Gemini starts to make a lot of sense. Who do you go to school with? Who are you in class with? Who are you working with? What do you say to them? How do you get what you want? Who are you in competition with? Jupiter leans towards, and Sagittarius lean towards higher truths, morality, intention, authenticity. What is real, what is truthful. Sagittarius is a more isolated sign, and Mercury is not an isolated planet. So when the planet of communication finds itself in the part of the chart that has to do with authenticity, it is tested and uncomfortable. And that's the only thing with this full moon, where the planet ruling the full moon is not exactly in his element. He's in this opposite sign of Sagittarius where the sun is. And so the only thing I would say with this particular full moon is watch your intentions. And I mean that constructively. You know, whatever it is that you find yourself in the middle of, the see and be seen component. We see this even with things like the award season and what issues are being highlighted, and there are larger issues that are at play. And do you navigate around them, or do you bring them up, or do you focus on societal truths and what is represented and what is not represented, and who is represented and who is not represented, and whether it makes sense to bring it up or not, or do you in the middle of all the social interactions, we're still very much at a time where our own truths, when you are playing the see and be seen game, and we all have to play it, even those of us who choose to live under a rock have to get out there and go and submit a form somewhere, or have to pick up the phone every now and then. When you play the see and be seen game, be aware that somewhere someone is watching and making an assessment. And so the best guide that I can give with this particular full moon is to say, as you determine how it is that communication has to be used to achieve whatever aim has to be achieved, ensure that it is working towards some sort of higher truth. It's not going to be comfortable necessarily to get to that point, but it may be helpful to cushion or to blanket whatever it is that you're trying to communicate or state, or to check in with yourself. You know, just do that touchstone of, am I being quick and clever and slick? And self-centered and self-oriented? And kind of gift of the gab and basically trying to get whatever it is that I want out of this situation? Or am I truly willing to, or am I being noble? Gemini's not a sign. Gemini's not a noble sign. Sagittarius is a noble sign. And somewhere this full moon is happening on this axis of, this Gemini Sagittarius axis for me is the axis of wisdom, because both signs are preoccupied by knowledge. In Sagittarius' case, it tends to become more preoccupied by wisdom, whatever we consider wisdom. But in Gemini's case, you know, knowing how to solve a math equation or working on an economics problem is not without wisdom. It may be more Geminian, it may be more mental. But somewhere there is this question of authenticity that comes into play. And perhaps nobility with regard to how things are being managed, especially when it comes to this kind of see and be seen, kind of visible, my community, my social circle, my relatives, schmoozy game, that the Gemini energies that we all have in some part of our chart. You know, it's interesting. Gemini is the sign that occupies my house of friendship, and it's always interesting to me the high percentage of my friends who have strong Gemini placements. This is where astrology becomes fun. This is where Gemini astrology becomes interesting. So yeah, as full moons go, it's relatively benign. I hope and I wish that this is a relatively benign full moon for you. It could very well be that you are in communication. It could be that you are in strategic communication. It could be that some of this communication has to do with your environment or neighborhood around you, or has to do with social media, or has to do with siblings and cousins and relatives to some extent. It will certainly be worth looking at where Gemini sits in your chart to see where the full moon is happening, because not only would it have this Geminian flavor of sickness and communication and interaction, but it will be related to where Gemini sits in your chart. And once it's done, the 4 or 5 days that follow a full moon are my favorite time, particularly once the full moon is worked its way through. So 48 hours before a full moon and 24 hours after a full moon, the full moon energies calm down. So, you know, by the time you get to Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, can be the perfect times to get things done, because the energy is just right. It's just balanced. It's not hysterical and intense and over-intensified as it is around the time of the full moon, and it's not before the new moon, which will occur in a couple of weeks' time, when the energy starts to flatten out. It's hard to get something done. After a full moon, especially after 24 hours have passed, is the best time to try and get things done, because you still have a certain amount of energy. The skateboard is still rolling and you can get on it, and there's a sense of balance towards getting things done, getting things wrapped up. So enjoy that part of the process. And I will leave it at that. Feel free to share this video if you found it useful, comment on it, subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's funny, as I'm thinking about this, I'm realizing that by the time I'm done responding to people and being in touch with them, it will probably be 24 hours after the full moon is done. You know, it's not like I didn't want to get to it sooner. It's just fascinating, you know, to what extent are we in control and to what extent are we not? And there are other things going on right now. I can clearly see where Mars is playing out in Scorpio for me, and all, you know, there are other energies at work too. Feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Click on the bell icon next to the subscribe button to be notified when I do new videos. My contact information is in the subject area, so if you are interested in a reading or interested in getting an easy-to-access version of your chart, you're welcome to contact me. And I will be in touch again. I do think I might do some content on Mercury and Sagittarius, but I know that I need to do more about the planets that are building up in Capricorn. So I have a feeling that is where these videos are going to be going in the next few days and weeks. Until then, thanks.